So I've got with me today, if you don't already recognize his face, Dan Hafley. And Dan and I spent about an hour and a half on the phone the other day. We did that 2-hour conversation here on YouTube a couple weeks ago, and we want to have another conversation. Dan has asked quite a few times, actually, about certain passages in the New King James Version and Modern English Version that he found to be troubling, that he disagreed with. And just like he's done to me, I want to give him a chance to express his concerns. And I want to take an opportunity to try to answer them. I might not satisfy Dan. I might not satisfy people out there in YouTube land. That's totally fine. We want to put forth our perspectives and lead them between you and God. Dan, thank you so much for joining me again. I really appreciate it. What am I interrupting today?
Oh, we're just finishing up our last day of school for the Christmas season. You know, they're getting ready to go into Christmas. So I finished up my high school Greek class and was really happy. I had a couple of students that got 100. That was
Awesome.
good. So I was pretty excited. Some of the kids are not quite as adept at, honestly, about 20 kids in the class. And
Yeah.
it's a wide range of, one student wants to continue into a second semester, which is kind of with first semester stuff. All of them can kind of get. Second semester is going to get more intense. And so I wasn't going to demand that they all took the second semester.
Right.
But I've got some interest in it. So I'm kind of excited. Hopefully we got some budding translators coming up. That's one of our hopes. There's so many Bible languages out there that don't have a Bible in their language, and
Right.
we need to have people that have this gift that can translate and help translate.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, that's good. So,
And, you know, that is more important than what we're doing here. That is, you've got important church ministry and school ministry, and your son that I really enjoyed meeting has been really kind to me. He is the principal of the school. Is that right?
that's right. Yes, we call him the headmaster, whatever, the head of school, I think is the term they use now. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're doing important stuff. And when you have to go running off at the end, it'll be because God has called you to that important stuff. But this conversation is important as well. And
It is.
our last conversations have served a lot of people. People on both sides of the debate were happy about the collegiality and the courtesy that was shown on both sides. And let's not just praise ourselves here. We'll let other people say the nice things. But I can say it about you that I definitely felt that. And then in our other conversation, I had people like practically begging me to do this again. So I'm glad that you could clear some time in your schedule. Because you don't have tons of time, we probably need to jump right into it. We kind of put together some passages that we could discuss. And I think the very first one was Hebrews 3:16, which I kept putting you off on answering in our previous conversations. Just wasn't getting around to it. Yeah. So explain your concern.
Before we jump into that, I wanted to say specifically, I mean, we can talk about the MEV, or we can talk about, I think specifically the NKJV is what you were interested in. And I think that's been around, since the early 70s, I believe, and was accepted by a lot of what I would say fundamentalists back in those days. Jerry Falwell was ones that supported it and so on. And I found this interesting article. I was just looking into the NKJV a little bit more. I told you before that I'm not as well versed in the NKJV as a lot of people are, and I know that came as a surprise to you, but basically because we rejected it back in the 70s. My dad did, and others in his group. And so I looked at it, but I never really paid much attention, and it never seemed to really catch on in the fundamental work, as much as it could have, or it seemed like it was going to. But David Cloud, I don't know if you know who that is, but
Definitely.
He's Way of Life Literature.
Right.
I found an article he published in March 9th of 2003, and then I think he republished it in
Yeah, he likes to do that. Yeah.
22nd. Huh?
He likes to do that. I've noticed him do that, republish things.
So this was first published in 2003, and he's making a comment about the New King James Version. And I thought, in our discussion, this was interesting because I know David Cloud probably doesn't agree with even our conversation.
Right.
But he said this, the NKJV is the best of the modern versions, since it is not based on the critical Greek text.
Right.
I wish we could recommend it because I have great sympathy with the plight of those who read English as a second language and have trouble with the antiquation of the King James. I was actually surprised to see that he had written that.
Yeah.
As missionaries in South Asia, we've worked closely with such people for many years, and many personal friends fall into this category, and the difficulty they have with the King James is very real.
Right.
So that's an interesting statement, and that's where, that's what I've been saying, and you've been saying, and this is kind of, people have taken us to task for this on both sides of the aisle. But I thought it was interesting for him to say what you claim, that the NKJV is not based on the critical Greek texts. So, having said that, that's the general opinion of everyone. But when you look deeper into the NKJV and you start comparing, like Hebrews 3:16, for example, and there's others. I sent you a short list yesterday, I think, of some others, and I've got a ton more that I'd like to just touch on, and then you could comment whatever you want to do. But some of them indicate that the critical text was used as a resource. And then in some cases, it's just they used the same translation metric, I guess you could say, as the new versions, and didn't stay with and made arbitrary changes that didn't make sense to make it more understandable. And I want to say a couple things here we have a problem with. There's three things, really, in the NKJV. One is that it is not faithful to the Textus Receptus. When I use the word faithful, I don't mean it's not, these guys weren't godly men. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the text itself does not adhere strictly to the received text. There are variations that they follow the critical text. Second problem that you have with NKJV is that some of the translation issues, they follow modern translation choices that are unnecessary changes that don't make it more clear. A third problem I see with the NKJV is that in some cases they'll use words that are more obscuring. So the NKJV,
sequences,
right?
Yeah.
So in those cases, the NKJV doesn't answer the quest, as it were, to make it more understandable. So if its purpose is to make it more understandable, why didn't it do that? Why wasn't it consistent? And my complaint, which is the same as yours, is understandability. Okay? So I'm saying, look, and we could go off on the MEV as well. The MEV's done some of the same things in some cases.
Yeah.
Look, if we're going to be consistent about understandability, then we can't say, well, the NKJV is the answer, because it's not.
Because of those reasons that you gave.
Right.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. You've given real clarity. You've given 3 reasons. And, I think that the last 2, we can talk about real briefly and then kind of set aside to focus on the first one, because you've come up with some passages I think it's important to discuss.
Okay.
And can I just say that on the more difficult words one, that was your third reason. The reason the New King James was created, same with the Modern English Version, is not only, this is especially true of the New King James, it was not created only to update the King James. And therefore, I want to acknowledge a key word you said in your second point, that some of their updates or changes were unnecessary. I actually agree with that, and I think they should not have said it's merely an English update to the King James. I've had people tell me repeatedly that they remember, or they even have in their possession, marketing materials from the early 80s when the New King James was finished. That's when I began, by the way, the early 80s. And they say that the claim was that the New King James was only updating the English. Well, that proved to not be the case. There are not quite a number of passages people have come forth with where even if the New King James translators, decision was legitimate, it's one of the options that you could legitimately take for translating the Greek and Hebrew. It wasn't the option taken by the King James translators, and they should have just done that. And honestly, I wish that's what they'd done, because then maybe we wouldn't be having to have this conversation.
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, honestly, when the NKJV came out, most of the King James guys that were in our circles looked at it as a viable option. Hey, this is what we've been asking for. Well, and then we were very disappointed, which is one of the reasons why, frankly, you have the attitude in the KJVO camp is like about an update is like it's been done, and we had our hopes, and our hopes were dashed.
Right. Yeah. So, when it comes to there's a couple issues here before we get into the passages that we've set out for ourselves. One is, I just want to ask you, when the King James translators come to a spot of ambiguity in the Greek, and the classic one I always point to, I've come across many others that are like this, is Matthew 6, I think it's 25 or 26. I can look it up here.
Sure.
Where in the King James, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is saying, okay, it's Matthew 6:27. Which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature? Well, very literally, that reads from the Greek, which of you by taking thought can add 1 measure to his span? And the question is this a span of life, or is this a span of height, physical height? And it's not as if older translations tend to go with one option and newer ones tend to go with the other. They're actually still split. So the ESV reads differently at Matthew 6:27. This is going to lead to a question here, Dan, for you. ESV, which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his span of life? So they've gone the opposite direction. Okay. It just so happens, again, I just want to prove that this isn't just, older translations versus newer ones. The CSB, which is from 2017, and actually they had another revision after that. Can any of you add 1 moment to his lifespan by worrying? Oh, wait, no, it must have been the HCSB. I thought for sure I have this right. Maybe they've gone, the 2017 one. I know I've seen one of the CSBs that reads the same way the King James does. People are just going to have to take my word for it at this point, because I can't remember which of the modern translations does what. When the King James translators go one direction rather than another on a place of ambiguity that God put there, it really could mean either thing. Were they led by the Holy Spirit in such a way that contemporary translators, like those of the New King James, really need to follow what they did?
Okay, so that's a really good question. And I think that, and here's a couple answers to that. One is that the King James translators often follow the contextual, so level. So what are we talking about in this passage? We're talking about clothes. We're talking about food. We're talking about stuff that, tangible things. And so I would go with the measure to the stature, because we're not talking eternal. We're not talking life. And so I think that's why they went that direction. And I think to change that is you go up there. It's like the ESV is saying, aha, we could translate it this way, so we're going to. Without really thinking about the context. And I've seen this several times in some of the new translations, is like they translate, it could be this, and so we're going to do this, rather than, why did the King James translators use that choice? Okay, so that's one thing. I have another, but go ahead.
I think that one of my most frequent complaints about King James onlyists, and I'm not really including you in that category anymore, Dan. You've just shown an openness to consider an update to the King James that kind of leads you out of that specific designation, but still you're defending the King James here. One of my biggest complaints is that I don't see when someone like Albert Hemd of the Trinitarian Bible Society writes a 38,000 word, two-part piece for the Trinitarian Bible Society's, publication that is just, going after the New King James on passage after passage after passage, out of about 30, 40 examples of passages that he says are really, really bad, translation choices, only once did I feel like he accurately represented the reasons why the New King James translators did what they did. And that's going to be one of the goals of our talk when we get into these other passages. But as for the ESV translators, I can represent what their motivations would be. I think that they made a legitimately different judgment about the context. So in Matthew 6, yes, you're right. Physical things are mentioned. But part of context is trying to imagine, what would the original hearers have heard here? And what metaphor is more likely? Someone who is anxious about adding a measure or cubit to his span, or someone who's anxious about adding a measure to his life? Now, you have students around you, 7th grade boys who probably are anxious to add a cubit to their span, right? They want to grow taller, but that's a desire of relatively few people in life, whereas pretty much everybody wants to live longer. I think that's the simple reasoning of the ESV translators. I forget what the New King James translators did. I assume they did the same thing.
Hang on there. So, but then there's also, you probably heard me say this, there's also remote context. So immediate context, I would interpret, and I think the King James translators were masters at some of this, tying in extra remote context. So to answer your question about this specific issue, which wasn't even on our list, but this is fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would love to have more of these conversations. There's so much to talk about. Here's a pushback on, can a person add to his life? What does Ephesians 6 say? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with promise, and it may well thee, and that thou mayest live long on the earth. Mm-hmm. So your behavior does extend your lifespan.
Sure.
So by taking thought, you could add to your lifespan.
Taking thought means being anxious in that passage.
Yeah, but you couldn't to say that you cannot add to your lifespan. Well, that's not even factually accurate, because there's 2 or 3 reasons that we would say: diet, exercise, and purity. Right?
Dan, I think you got tripped up by a false friend, brother, because the Greek word there, I'm just going to go ahead and pronounce it since we both know Greek, is merimnao, and it means to be apprehensive, to have anxiety, be anxious, be unduly concerned. You took taking thought as giving attention to, and therefore tied in Ephesians 6. But that, I don't think that connection works.
So
because I don't think that's what taking thought
So you think that means, and hang on, let me grab hang on a second. Looking in my Greek text. By Lynn, by being, and so what was the word you have for that?
Well, merimnao, and it's all throughout the passage, right? I can pull up.
Okay, so mine has
on it.
Merimnon. So it's,
well, yeah, I was giving the lemma form. Well, being careful is a false friend. That meant anxiety. Now, technically,
this was my my Greek interlinear, as I have this Greek interlinear to cheat, and it uses the word being careful.
How old is that interlinear?
It's going to be right around 1872, 73.
Yeah. So in the King James, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. That doesn't mean we're giving, we're failing to give care and attention. It means we're not worried. We don't have anxiety. Right. So we're actually getting tripped up by English changes.
Like Philippians, what you're saying.
Exactly.
Like Philippians, he says, be careful for nothing. So is that the same word in Philippians, be careful for nothing?
I can find that out.
Uh-huh.
I can find that out in 1 second. In Logos, where did it go? Be careful for nothing. That's Philippians 4:6, and yep, that's merimnao. So
Okay, is it
it mean,
merimnao? Is that the form?
well, I'm just giving the lemma form. I'm not giving the morphological form there. It's merimnate because it's an imperative. So I mean, the further context of Ephesians can be relevant. I'm not denying that, but the direct context of Matthew 6, that whole paragraph is about not being anxious.
Yeah. So what we agree here is that there is obviously a difference of opinion on how this should read, and in that case, I would go with the King James translators in those cases. And the other thing I was going to say to you was, so our last conversation, I don't want to go off into Hebrew too far, but we talked about Nephilim a little bit, and I misspoke a little bit on that one, but Nephilim itself, as you know, I'm sure you know this, means fallen ones, okay? So, or the Hebrew word, that means fallen.
So like you're saying, etymologically, it comes from the word for falling?
No, fallen. The Nephilim has the idea of fallen.
But I'm asking, where are we getting this? Because that's the same question I asked the last time.
According in Hebrew, that's what in my resources. And giants, according to what my resources tell me, means of the earth. So when the King James translators translated that giants, Nephilim, they translated it giants. What they were saying, basically, the direction that they went, they used the Septuagint to help them.
Right.
Because Septuagint said gigantes, right?
Right.
So they by combining basically the thoughts, fallen and of the earth, those giants are human. And that's so basically you've got, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. This is something I have come to believe over the last decade, I guess, in this kind of research. And I've come to believe that some of the meanings that we have actually come to us not from a dictionary, but from multiple languages. And the multiple languages will find their way into the dictionary. But in other words, what is this trying to say? Well, what you do is you look at the different English translations, and I think what the King James translators did was they looked at other translations as well, but other translations in other languages. So how did the Syriacs translate this? How did the Greeks translate this? How did and so that gives us the direction of the word. And I'll be honest, in a lot of the stuff that I've seen in new translation work, I'm not criticizing or questioning the sincerity of the men that do it, but it often feels like they're not using those other language tools to direct the translation like the King James translators apparently did.
And they said that, other translations diligently compared and revised, and they list a number in either the preface or the dedicatory epistle, I can't remember. Yeah, no, I can say with great assurance that contemporary translators worth their salt in English definitely check other languages, and they definitely check ancient language translations. When I worked at Crossway, I'm not allowed to say what I read there, but I read some of the stuff that was written by the ESB Translation Oversight Committee, and I was very, very impressed. I already knew they took it seriously. But Vern Poitras, whose website I run and whom I know personally, he sends me Omaha Steaks every year because I host his website. Such a gracious, godly man. I read a paper that he wrote, can't say on what passage, but boy, did he bring the goods. He is a polymath. He's totally brilliant. And he was absolutely bringing in the Syriac and ancient translations.
That's good.
But that's what you do when you don't have something better, actually. So you compare other translations when you don't have confidence about what a given word means. The way you have confidence about what a given ancient word means is by looking at other ways that it's used. And in the New Testament, we can look within the New Testament, but we can also look outside it. We've got tons of Greek to compare it to. In the Old Testament, we just don't have that liberty. practically all the Hebrew that we have of biblical Hebrew is Old Testament biblical Hebrew, minus some inscriptions. Often enough, those inscriptions are just from the Bible, a little amulet that'll have that special, benediction from Numbers.
And truthfully, the Hebrews have done, the Jewish people have done a yeoman's job, an amazing job.
Absolutely.
Of keeping it pure and keeping it straight. And so, and you also we don't seem to have, we have the Greek, we have two that I know of Greek translations. We have the Septuagint and we have the Aquila's edition, only portions of it. And then you have the Syriac Old Testament stuff that, Bashir and those kinds of things. But I don't know, there might be some Oriental stuff, but there's not a lot of ancient Hebrew translations that we have access to.
Right.
In multiple languages. And we do, with Greek, we have a plethora.
Right.
And so that's why that's always the fight. But,
so the King James translators themselves bring this up. They say in their preface that there are, Hebrew words about obscure things that even the Jews are not totally sure what this word means. I've actually been trying to bring it up this full time that I've been thinking about it. But the Jews don't always know the meaning of certain obscure Hebrew words.
Which is the purpose for the Talmud and other things, which Jesus kind of put down a little bit because he said, you guys make their traditions, the elders more valuable than the words of God. And I think that's important to remember. But one of the things that bothers me, and I guess this is the thing that everyone wants to talk about and we have avoided, is that, okay, so they do use other translations, they do use other texts, but they seem, the newer translations, and the KJV is, of course, the one we were going to talk about, but they lean heavily on the texts that seem to have been put aside by King James translators and by all of the English translators back in the 1500s.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. What text are they setting aside?
Okay,
and that now modern translations like the New King James,
like the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus and Codex, B and Aleph and.
This is a measure. This is a place that I bet you and I could achieve clarity where I just cannot get clarity with the vast majority of King James defenders who come on my YouTube channel comments and tell me something like this. I asked them, what do you mean they lean, like the New King James translators leaned on Sinaiticus? Where? What? And so what do you mean, Dan? Give me an example.
So for example, the last few verses of Mark 16. 1 John 5:7, that's gone. Acts 8:37, that's gone.
We're in the New King James, they're not gone.
Right, I know.
So I'm talking about the New King James.
If we want to stay for time, right, with the New King James, let's talk about those things. I mean, Hebrews 3:16 was what you opened with, so let's start there.
Let's go there. Okay. Tell me about your concern about Hebrews 3:16, because let's get a little clarity here though. You're arguing that in the passages we're about to talk about, the New King James translators, though they said they were using the Textus Receptus, and they did say that in their preface, they said we use the traditional text of the New Testament. You're saying that they actually use the critical text.
Yes, that's my contention. As I look at it, so take what you printed, or you sent me something that you had listed. Hebrews 3:16, the THGNT, and
the TR, Scribner's TR, right?
And you 1894 TR, and the difference, obviously, in this verse is in the King James. For those that are listening, it says, "For some, when they had heard, did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses." So the NKJV says, "For who having heard rebelled," question, "indeed was it not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses?" And so the MEV follows that. All the new translations follow that question. They turn this statement into a question. And
Yeah.
it has to do with, believe it or not, punctuation and an accent mark.
Right.
Which an accent mark and the punctuation in the critical text makes it flips the scripts and makes it say, did not all that came out of Egypt rebel? I don't care whether you use the word provoke or rebel. I think rebelled is a better word choice for our current culture.
Right.
It makes it more understandable. So when you say, did they not all rebel, except, did all of those that came out of Moses, but did they rebel? I don't have a problem with the word rebel. What I have a problem with is the fact that the statement in NKJV and the MEV, it was a rhetorical statement which assumes that everyone that came out of Egypt rebelled against Moses.
Right, and that's a contradiction.
We know contextually that is not true.
Right.
And so the King James is accurate historically, without translating it. It's accurate with the received text. And the NKJV follows the critical text in this case. And it's not much talked about because the issue is not a word, it's punctuation.
Okay, great. Let's dive right in.
All right.
Number one, even without knowledge of Greek or Hebrew, if you go back in your King James to Numbers 14:2.
Okay.
It says, and all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in the wilderness.
Okay.
Is that a contradiction?
Okay. Okay, so give me that passage again, Numbers 1.
Numbers 14:2.
So I see what you're driving at here. So Numbers 14:2, a stylistic way of saying all of them, that they just passed over Caleb and Joshua.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I will tell you this. I'll give you my best shot at it, okay?
Okay.
There was a time when Joshua said, in Joshua, would to God we had died in Egypt. And the Lord tells him, get up off your face. That's an interesting story. At this point, maybe everyone was murmuring and complaining. I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that ultimately, the consequence of that was not everyone, the children did not. So, and when he's recounting the story in the New Testament, he has the benefit of having history on his side. He knows the answer. He knows what happened.
Yeah. I'm afraid it sounds like the rabid King James onlyists are at your door trying to beat it down to get in there, Dan.
I think you're playing up and down. I've got my door shut. I'm sorry. Is it too
It's
loud?
okay. I will try to use my magic arts to eliminate that. The next paragraph in Numbers 14 gives the exception. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. Okay, so within that very context, we have a qualification of this apparently, direct statement. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. Well, they didn't all do it.
And so
Moses
goes on and says Joshua and Caleb did not.
That in that very passage, we have a qualification of that statement, the all. And the word all, my dear Christian grandmother, who actually was converted due to a local friend out of, nominal Lutheranism when she was in her early 40s, about my age. My grandmother used to tell me all means all, in the Bible.
That's what all means. Yeah, I've heard that.
But think about something similar just in daily life, where context delimits the meaning of all. And I'm not trying to be squirrely here. I'm trying to observe the way language actually gets used.
Right? I'm following you.
The teacher in the class says, on Monday, everybody better be here on time and have their science fair projects done. And if you have one highly literalistic-minded, 8th grader who says, everybody in the whole world, and the teacher's like, no, obviously, everybody here is delimited by context. And I'd say the same thing about Hebrews 3:16, even without recourse to the Hebrew in Greek.
I'm tracking what you're saying.
You need not view it as a contradiction.
I'm tracking what you're saying. However, in this case, this is one of those things that I would say, okay, so why did you change it? Because actually the original, the received text, actually states it clearly, says not everyone that came out of Egypt rebelled. And that's true. We know that's true. So to go to the other side, you have to do a little bit of a dance to try to make it work.
Well, let me at least try to answer that question. And my encouragement to all King James onlyists out there who have concerns about specific renderings in the New King James, number one, watch my videos that I did on Albert Hem's complaints. I tackle almost all the main complaints. And I find that often what he's going after is similar to what you've said. That is, why was it even necessary to change this?
Second, hold your thought.
Go ahead.
Second is like unto it, because the reason I'm asking you to hold your thought is because we're getting into the weeds of the whys and wherefores of the translation choice. Right. When what we really want to hone in on is that this is a critical text rendering.
Right. And we will get there. We'll get there. Okay. But first I want to say, let's try to represent accurately the motivations that would most likely have moved the New King James translators. Okay. Now, they didn't get to write all that down. The best we can do, usually, is to use our knowledge of Greek and Hebrew and then go to standard evangelical commentaries, of which there are many, and try to look at what is their reasoning. And if you go, for example, to the New International Greek Testament commentary written by Paul Ellingworth, and I want to say it was like back in the 1990s, but I can't remember the date. He talks very carefully through the reasons that some translators go this way, some translators go another. I won't actually get into all of them. I'll just mention that the ones who go where the New King James translators go, they tend to see in Hebrews 3 a series of rhetorical questions, and they think it's most natural to take the middle term, I believe it is, of those three rhetorical questions as also a rhetorical question. I think that's the major thing driving them. Right. So, but then the next questions are, why did they have to change it when they could have just stuck with what the King James translators did? And that's legitimate. And it is. And in fact, Ellingworth seems to kind of lean that direction from what I read in his commentary.
And so what happens to guys like me? I want to hear the truth, and I hear what you're saying. I understand they're looking at rhetorical questions, a lineup of rhetorical questions, and this looks like the flow, just like what the argument I used in Matthew 6. The flow seems to be a physical thing, and so that's why translators make those choices. My contention is simply this: one of the reasons why we don't trust them is because here's this obscure little verse nobody pays attention to.
Right.
And it follows the critical text.
Okay, so let's talk about that then. Let me ask, so you are successfully, and this isn't bad, this is good, you're successfully for the first time getting me to talk about textual criticism. And we're going to do that, we're willing, another time or two as our conversation goes on. Here's why I'm willing to, because I still insist that the New King James used the Textus Receptus.
Basically.
Well, and even in these exceptions, the question is, how tight are you going to get on the exact jot and tittle of a given Textus Receptus edition? Because the tighter you get, the more you're apt to say Scrivener's 1881 Textus Receptus is the exact jot and tittle representation of the originals. And some people do absolutely go there. Then you're going to have to explain, well, why do some other Textus Receptus editions differ? We'll get there. Let me ask this question. Are the accent marks part of the perfect preservation, or just the preservation of God's word in your understanding?
Well, that's a big question, because in this case, I don't know if the accent mark in the Greek, I mean, it does denote it changes it from a didactic statement to a question. So in this case, that plus the semicolon, or the question, the Greek question mark, in this case, it flips the meaning of the verse. But I wouldn't say categorically, I'm not going to say, I don't think that the accent marks are the jots and tittles. I don't believe that myself. Okay, just so you know, I think the jot and the tittle, I think, is referring to Hebrew letters. That's my take on that. So just so you know, to answer your question.
So then the question becomes, all right, somewhat similarly to the Hebrew vowel points, when we talk about Greek accents, I mean, we're really getting into the weeds here, but this is what the people are demanding.
Right.
The Greek accents were not present in early centuries of manuscripts. Okay. So they had to be added later. Somebody had to sit down and make a decision. Is it tines or tines, which is the difference of accenting on that word, which makes it either a statement or a question. And my question is,
are you saying that, just for clarification and to hone in on it, are you saying then that the Textus Receptus does not always, in this case, that there are TR copies that would follow the critical text?
I'm not saying that. I don't know that. I did check into some of these passages, and therefore I hope to get there because I stayed up till about 1 o'clock last night after finishing another video.
Maybe we could do it another day.
Yeah, but I'm coming to the end of the year, and I want to be done engaging this topic. So I really wanted to make sure this happened today. I don't know. That is possible. What I'm saying is that this kind of thing forces a question on those who believe in a doctrine of, generally the way they put it is perfect preservation, where they don't have to do any textual criticism. And my question is, well, what about something like this, where the accent marks were apparently not written by Paul or Peter or John or Jude, the writers of the New Testament? They were added later. Are they part of this doctrine of preservation or not? Same with the punctuation marks, because that semicolon, which is, in the Greek text, it's what we would use a question mark for, that was added later too. Those were not present in any of the early manuscripts that we have. So are they part of God's promise of preservation? I would say presumably not, because that's not what Paul wrote. They had to be added later. And therefore, they were added by humans, not by the Holy Spirit. And therefore, other humans have to be allowed to come along and say, in this one really obscure spot where no one's going to notice, just like you said, I really think that the context is leading me to view this a little bit differently. I'm not changing the letters of the text. The New King James translators were not changing the letters of the TR. They were putting an accent on a different syllable and using a different punctuation mark as a result.
And again, we're getting in the weeds, but this is a thing. So there's what I believe the complete context of the Bible. So in the New Testament, you'll find summary stories, right? Hebrews is one of those. It summarizes a bunch of things. Acts does the same thing. Mm-hmm. Summarizes these stories, and I kind of step back and look at it. So the actual story is that not everyone that came out of Egypt rebelled.
Right.
And that's the actual story. So the King James edition of that actually gets that right. And presumably then, whoever added the accent marks got that right, because that's the story. But see, to our point, our discussion here is that the NKJV, in this case, when it had the option of following and saying, we're just updating the King James, it had that option. Well, it didn't. It went with and see, here's the thing. Just before we get too far in the weeds anymore, and I think you've answered, to your point, you've answered well, and you articulated your position well. I get it, and it's a good intellectual position. I don't disagree with that, but I disagree with your conclusion. But there are other verses. So just a quick thing, and then you can answer over because of time, and you want to end the conversation. But Luke 135 is one.
Yeah.
So in Luke 135, that child which was born of thee, okay, so that was left out. That part was left out. The of thee part was left out in the NKJV, okay, which follows the critical text, okay. And my point is in Colossians 3. Okay. I was just going to bounce through a couple of really quick examples.
Can we do it one by one?
Okay,
because
that's
I'm
fine.
prepared to talk about these. I'm glad we sat down in advance to talk about them. Luke 135.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll put the King James and the New King James up next to each other.
Okay, that's good.
In parallel columns. I'll put the King James first. All right. Luke 135. This is the angel, the Annunciation. Okay, Luke 135. Come on, Logos. I'm working on a tiny screen here and it kind of messes things up. Okay. The angel answered and said unto her, the Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Therefore also that holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. And in the New King James, it's almost all the same, except that Holy One who is to be born will be called the Son of God. The of thee is not present. That's what you're pointing to.
So my point is simply this, to your argument that the New King James follows the TR instead of the critical text. Again, here's another point where it does not. It follows the critical text because the critical text takes that out, and every TR that I can find has that exu in there.
Yeah.
So the fact that they removed that of the out of there, for what purpose? To make it more understandable? Okay, but I don't know how it makes it more understandable.
So let us look at one of the Greek New Testament editions that was used by the King James translators. They primarily used Beza's 1598 and Robert Stephanus, also called SDN, 1550 edition. As I recall,
this is a copy you're showing me of what they actually used?
This is Robert Stephanus's 1550. I will try to remember to put a link in the show notes, and if I don't, please remind me, commenters, and I'll do it because I saved the link, okay? And I'm going to read to you from one of the TRs used by the King James translators. And the angel answered and said to her, the Holy Spirit will overshadow you, and the power of the Most High will come upon you. Wherefore also the one who is born will be holy, and he will be called the Son of God. There's no exu, which means from you. Beza 1598, I did check, and it has the exu. I checked Erasmus's first edition, and it has the exu. So one of my big answers, Dan, to the challenge here of
so they used a different TR.
They used a different TR. That's correct. Yeah.
Huh.
And it was represented to me always when I was in King James onlyism. And I feel like I did not attend an extremist, Ruckmanite King James only church growing up. For us, as for Ambassador Baptist College and Crown College and Pensacola Christian College and West Coast Baptist College and the King James Bible Research Council, as originally conceived at least, the idea was that the text is the issue. And what was represented to me was there is one TR, as a commenter on my YouTube channel just insisted to me the other day. One Textus Receptus, and it has been perfectly preserved. But that simply isn't the case. And the most responsible King James leaders, like E.F. Hills, wrote the King James Version Defended, acknowledges that there are differences among TR editions, but they all say they're not a big deal, they're all minor. But if that's the case, and if this given example, Luke 135 of the New King James, not having the phrase of you, which again is like, what does that even do to the meaning? It doesn't change the meaning at all. But yes, it matches the critical text. It also matches another TR edition. But did the New King James translators have to follow exactly, precisely the same TR that the King James translators did?
Well, if they had, we would not be having this conversation.
True.
Because see, as you said before, I mean, this is such a complex issue and conversation that really there's not a lot of people. I'm not patting us on the back. It's just there's not a lot of people that really understand what all goes into this, and so they look at the English and like this is the same as NKJV is the same as NIV here. Hello, it's following the wrong text, and then just a little bit of digging, you're like the TR has this and this one doesn't, and so that, and I hear what you're saying about the different TRs. Now the guys that I'm with on the King James Council, like Dr. Brown and some of those, they would say that the Stephanus text done by Scrivener is the one we want to follow.
Well, but Scrivener didn't do the Stephanus text.
Or
he took Stephanus and Beza and all of the other Greek texts and translations that were used by the King James translators, and he said, okay, at this place of variation, which one did the King James translators go with? Well, I'll put that in my text.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So
was the real story. Yeah. And so
he doesn't match Stephanus.
That's the one that the King James Bible Research Council, the most of them, would follow. Scrivener's
1881.
Yeah.
This is the question I can't get an answer to, Dan. I just cannot get a straight answer from anybody. And you can see a little frustration. And I'm like really hopeful you'll give me the answer because you've gotten this far in your understanding. Which TR is the perfect one and why that one? You know, the rhetoric is constantly, and I'll quote R.B. Willett here. I know he's not part of the King James Bible Research Council, but his book, A More Sure Word, he said, you know, all of the efforts of scholars, this is going to be a paraphrase until keywords here. All the efforts of scholars, you know, to reconstruct the text will be imperfect and tentative. That's why we need an absolute scripture. I am constantly encountering textual absolutism among the text is the issue King James onlyists. They're saying we got to have all the words, every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, you know, a man's going to live by, and therefore we got to have all of them. I just heard somebody yesterday say that back in the old days, they didn't, you know, in the Reformation times, they didn't doubt any of the words like we're doubting them now. They had all the words. And I'm saying, well, is exu, are they part of all the words or not? So which TR and why?
Yes. Hang on one second. I'm going to have to get going here real quick, but I'm sorry about that. So your question is a valid question, and that's the thing that I think. Okay, Brian Ross dealt with this a little bit. There have been some he put together quite a lengthy discussion on the two streams.
Right.
Have you read that?
I'm familiar with Brian generally. We text all the time.
Okay.
He's one of the best friends across the aisle.
I think you would find it interesting. Brian Ross has this
verbatim identicality of wording.
Not that one. This one is not published. I told him the other day, I said, you need to publish this. It was like a PDF he sent me.
Okay.
It's, hang on. It's, where did I put it? Oh, hang on. It's called The Two Streams of Bible's Model of Transmission.
Yeah. He and I've talked about this. Yep.
So I printed it off. He sent me a PDF. I printed it off and GBC bound it so I could actually, digest it. It's a series of Sunday school lessons that he did. And he did a lot of research on this. I think you'll find that very interesting. And we're going to go off again just for a second into this, but his research he found out where the two streams idea came from.
Yeah.
And it's kind of dubious. In fact, some of the texts that got in the uncorrupt stream, as it were, and some of the texts that got into the corrupt stream actually are not right.
Right.
And so he does a lot of work on the detail, and that's one of the things I like about Brian is he's very
he's an amazing detail guy. Yeah,
detail. I love that when you get into studying the details and actually the facts. He can come up with them. So, I recommend you look at that. The thing that, and he would probably follow your line of thinking in this area more than some of the KJV guys. Some of the conversations about which TR then, how do you decide? which TR
Right.
is right, which is the same question is, how do you decide which King James is correct?
Right. Which is something Ross has done some really good work on as well.
Right. So I found this guy in Australia or something earlier, and he said, well,
1900 Cambridge. Yeah, Matthew is short.
over 1769. I'm like, what? How did you determine this? Well, I don't know. God showed it to him, and then his elder board got together and they decided this, and so then everybody's quoting him. Well, this is the accurate one because he said so. And I'm like, well, what are your metrics? Well, how do you determine this, right? And that's what you're asking about the TR. Which TR is true? And to the guys that I've talked to that are honest about this, and a lot of guys, I mean, to say, even on the King James Bible Research Council, the guys that I've talked to about this, there are external metrics that we're trying to figure out and bringing to bear to answer the question. External things. Like, okay, so the King James text itself. Okay, rationally, it was an absolute brilliant piece of work.
Sure. Yeah.
It has lasted 400 years. It has proved itself, and we trust it. So the TR that matches the one we trust is the one we're going to go with, right?
And
I know that's not satisfactory to academics, but that is the answer to your question, because at the end of the day, there's so many threads that end in where and how. Right. That's what they say. And just to finish this point, someone asked me, am I King James preferred? No, I'm not. Am I King James only? No, I'm not. And I guess there's no real term that's been coming up with so far. I guess the only thing I could say is I'm KJV trusting. I trust it. I trust the KJV. I think they did an accurate job. I think they knew what they were doing.
Yes, absolutely.
And every time I burrow in on a question that I have, I come away saying, wow, they were good. To find that razor-thin dance. Okay, could go this way, could go this way, but they came up with this. And wow, that was a really good decision. And then when I look at the NKJV and I see that it follows in many of those cases, those razor-thin lines, it seems to drift towards the ESV or the NIV. And I'm like, guys, if you do an update of the King James, don't change Hebrew 3:16 to a question. Don't follow all of those others, don't follow them. Follow the majority, the Byzantine majority.
Well, I wouldn't I would say the first thing and not the second.
Okay, very good.
But yeah, I would say I wish the New King James translators had merely updated the English, and I acknowledge there are many places where they didn't. And pragmatically speaking, it would have been better for them to just do what the King James translators did. Then again, we wouldn't hopefully be having this discussion. I think still some people would find something to complain about, but I think there would be more, people that we now call King James onlyists who would be using the King James.
The largest percentage of the King James guys would have gone with the NKJV if they had not drifted.
Yeah,
those lanes.
I'm really glad to hear you say that. I can't make myself believe that, but I would like to. I would like to believe that.
That's the circles I grew up in. The circles I grew up in would have gone that way. And tried
mine wouldn't. I guess we're reflecting the circles we were in our formative years.
Just to echo that, David Cloud is one of that ilk that said, well, I wish I could recommend the NKJV.
And here's where, we're kind of running out of time here, and we didn't get to all the passages that we marked out. But
I think we got to the point.
And I do think so, with two major different issues. One is, when there's ambiguity in the Greek, are modern translators, like the New King James translators, are they required to follow what the King James translators did? I'm saying pragmatically, prudentially, that would have been wise. But it's not theologically necessary, because the King James translators did not have Holy Spirit nudges, go with that option, that the New King James translators lacked. Otherwise, we're into Ruckmanism, okay? And then the second issue that was brought up is, does the New King James use the critical text? And if almost all of the places where people like Kent Brandenburg and Albert Hemd have said, see, the New King James uses the critical text, when I actually look into the details, that either wasn't the case or actually it's more complicated. Like, well, there were other TR editions where they were required to follow the same TR edition as the King James translators. Then we start getting into the weeds. One more little weed I wanted to bring up was, you want to use the Greek text that matches the English translation that you trust. And pragmatically, prudentially, I totally get that. Theologically, and according to my calling as someone who wants to be scholarly, even though I don't regard myself as a scholar advancing the discipline, I want to be responsible with the facts of history like Brian Ross does. I have to point out the King James does not match Scrivener. Hebrews 10:23 is a prime example where there are no Greek texts that have the word faith there. They have the word hope. And the King James translators translated the word elpis, which is always translated hope. It means hope. They translated it with faith in Hebrews 10:23. And Scrivener could not find any Greek New Testament that had the word faith. So he stuck with hope. He basically was saying he thinks the King James translators made an error. And I'm not eager to say that. I have one video on my channel where I say the King James translators made an error. I plead for the perspective on translation that the King James translators themselves had. They said, can't we denominate things by their greater part? That is, can't we name things by their predominant characteristics? And they said in their preface, a man can be handsome even if he has a wart on his hand or even on his face, okay? And they're saying a translation can be good even if there were minor blemishes and imperfections in it. And then they go on to say, it takes the Holy Spirit, the extraordinary influence of God's Spirit, to make a perfect translation. And I would say the same about textual decisions. And what I see my King James brothers doing is rightly trusting the time-tested King James Version, but then nitpicking the tiniest little things that will never lead anybody astray. Who in the world in 40 years, reading the New King James, it came out in 1982, who in the world has come and said, Hebrews reveals that Numbers was wrong, or the Bible has errors because this says everybody who came out of Egypt rebelled, but clearly Joseph and Caleb were not included. Nobody does that. So what we end up with is people who pick on these tiny little things that actually aren't causing problems and then swallow a bunch of archaisms that are causing problems. I think just take one false friend, even a minor one, like coasts. The King James uses the word coasts where we would use the word borders. And there are these places where it's just kind of confusing. And unless you know false friends, you're not going to realize you're misunderstanding. That alone, to me, and the dozens or hundreds of instances of the word coast where it actually meant borders, and it's not an error, that's the way English was back then, that to me outweighs the terribly minor problem in Hebrews 3:16 in the New King James.
And see that I would disagree with that. So to me, coasts versus borders, so because I'm KJV literate, okay? So
Yeah.
coasts, I arguably I miss a pointer here or there, but in the back of my mind, I understand what coasts and borders are the same. I get it. I understand. It doesn't bother me at all. And I would say that's a fine point, but to you, it's a bigger point. The Hebrews 3:16, the reason I focused on that was because it is about a punctuation mark. It is about a question mark, Greek question mark. It's not about the word. It's about and by changing that little thing, it flips the meaning. It says exactly opposite. So what I'm saying is this, with in that case, if the NKJV follows the same path that all of the versions that would be critical text-based, they follow that in that one little secret hideaway place. What else have they done? It's not the Hebrews 3:16 that is the problem. It is the fact that they have done it there when no one would notice, which gives you cause to not trust them in the big things. So the idea of the Bible is that if you trust them in the little, they'll trust them in the big, right?
Instead, I would say
that's the problem. That's the problem.
I get that. I understand that. Instead, however, I would represent it the way the King James translators did. These are imperfect men doing good but imperfect work.
I get it.
And rather than seeing this as a subtle place where they're rubbing their hands together and saying, ha ha, we're going to sneak in a minor critical text reading and probably no one will notice. Ha 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 ha.
Well,
instead,
I don't really think that's what happened, but yeah.
Instead, they're humans and they made a mistake. Or, in Hebrews 3:16, I don't think they did make a mistake. I think they did what was totally legitimate, and that there's a version of TR defense that would have to allow for this. Because if TRs differ as much as they do, and I've kind of shouted this vainly, I have not gotten answers from my TR defending brothers.
I know what you're saying. I know there's multiple TRs. I know what is multiple. What I would say is TRs, and I think the whole TR argument needs some more research and more, I would say, writing and exposure to it. Just like what Brian Reese came up with the two streams. I think we need to stop and look at that. I've asked some of my KJV friends that, look, we need to, some of the arguments that we've been making we need to clarify them a little better than what we're doing. Our arguments they don't hold water. Yeah. Some of them don't hold water. And
meanwhile,
yeah.
Meanwhile, and this isn't really for you. This is for the KJBRC. But while you're working on that, I would ask those leaders out there, restrain your followers from telling me I'm not saved until you have an answer to the question, because I raised this question, and I get this is a level of complexity, a level of weeds. We've used that metaphor several times that just isn't accessible to most Christians, and I don't think it's supposed to be. I think that's okay.
Right.
But when they hear me say this, when they hear me point out, well, there's differences among TR editions and which one is the perfect one, they get scared and they feel like I'm attacking inerrancy. I'm not. I am an inerrantist. I'm saying we have to adjust our understanding of what preservation means to what God actually did. And God didn't use Urim and Thummim or a halo around a particular Greek New Testament edition. If we're going to insist on the letter perfect and now accent perfect accuracy of this and only this TR, well, then even the King James doesn't live up to it, because it gets wrong Hebrews 10:23, where it uses the word faith instead of what's in the Greek, which is clearly the word hope. That kind of letter perfect and accent perfect accuracy in textual transmission and in translation is only possible for inspired apostles and prophets, which is exactly what the King James translator said in their preface. And people say, well, any error of any kind, even a textual transmission error, means that you're denying inerrancy. And I say, no, I actually believe the TR to be inerrant. I think it's inerrant to speak as Hebrews 3:16 speaks in the TR, and I think it's inerrant to speak as it speaks in the critical text. I can interpret both according to the context of all of Scripture, recognizing that all is delimited by the context, and quite obviously the master of the Old Testament that wrote Hebrews, whoever it was, Paul or Luke or whoever, they perfectly well knew that Caleb and Joshua were not included among those who rebelled against.
But I agree. I get what you're saying, and I respect it. So my friend Brian Ross, our friend, who wrote Verbatim Identicality, he deals with the myth of verbatim identicality, which I think he coined that term. I think it was brilliant. That was, I would agree with you on that there is not to use his term, a verbatim identicality. I don't think
a perfect TR.
Yeah, I don't think that's something we need to strive for. And I think that there's different ways to say the same thing. My question with you, or my thing with you is, and I see what you're saying that you believe that across the board, there's no substantive doctrinal differences.
Right.
In any of the translations. And I would say,
in any of the major evangelical translations.
Yeah. And I would say maybe, and so therefore, that it is still okay for us to hone in as the language changes. It's okay for us to hone in to a better word choice or something. And to that point, I don't disagree with you. But I do disagree with the fact that there are some doctrinal differences. I think that when a verse says exactly opposite in one thing that it says in the other, no matter how simple, I think that the opposites are not the same. When it says they did or they didn't, That is an opposite statement.
Yeah.
And so for me, I can't go with you on that. I can't say,
Yeah.
although I understand what you're saying that it's still faithful to the Old Testament story and that you can actually extract the truth from it.
And unless God tells me this is the right one, hey, angels are singing as I pull up Scrivener's TR or as I pull up the Message 128. Yeah, that would hopefully solve it. You know what? Can I pause this for 1 second and just say something nice about you, Dan? You know, it's so refreshing to me. We don't agree, but here's something you keep doing over and over and over again. You keep saying, I see what you're saying. And I think I've said the same thing to you. Or I'll say to you, that's a valid question. Or you say, I get your perspective. Like how often in debate with my TR and King James brothers have I wished they would just say, okay, I do see what you're saying, but instead I don't hardly ever get that. So I really appreciate that. But I have a question for you.
The same.
Thank you. Is what's good for the
That's why I
goose.
enjoy this conversation, because we can actually get to the heart of the truth rather than trying to fight over
and one up each other. Right. And you've won me over. You've led me to trust you, Dan. And that was even before we did our debate. And somehow, I was afraid that the debate would put a wedge between us and make us distrust each other. And the reverse happened. In part because you paid for a very nice dinner beforehand. That was really tasty. Yeah, sure was. Okay, now, Dan, is what's good for the goose good for the gander? You're saying that there can't be a direct contradiction. But there are direct contradictions between TR editions. And I'm going to give you an example from my paper in the Detroit Baptist Seminary Journal. Okay. One is James 2:18. This is a little harder to follow, but in Stephanus's Textus Receptus, in James 2:18, it has, someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith by your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. So the middle of the verse says, show me your faith by your works. Okay?
I'm looking it up.
In Scrivener's Greek New Testament, and therefore in the King James, it has the opposite. Instead of show me your faith by your works, it has show me your faith apart from your works. That is formally the opposite.
That is. Okay.
And I'll give another one while you're looking it up. Revelation 11:2. In Stephanus, John is told not to measure the court inside the temple. That's esothen. And in Scrivener, which actually matches the critical text here, rather than matching Stephanus's TR. In Scrivener, he's told not to measure the court outside the temple, exothen. There is a direct contradiction between TRs. It's extremely minor, and given the context, there's no, doctrinal import.
So the thing is, I mean, we've established that there are different TRs, and I understand what you're saying, that some of these TRs are opposites, and so opposites are not the same. So I would have to say that one of them is right and one of them is wrong.
But how do we know which one is right and which one is wrong?
Determine that, right?
Right.
And that's where we defer. King James trusted people would defer to the choices that King James made without all of the information, which is why some of us would love to have all of their research. Why did you choose these things? I've asked several of my friends, so why did the KJV translators use this at this point when they could have used this?
Right.
I'd like to know what their reasons were, because there are some I've come up with that I don't know the reasons. I don't understand why they went this way instead of this way. And so some of what you would call the TRs are different, and we know that. I mean, historically, honestly, some of these TRs were as motivated by money as new versions are. Printers were doing the printing, and they were trying to get them out, and they were trying to make money off of them, and that's the truth. And so I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know, and that's where we have come for 400 years. We've accepted and and acknowledge that the King James. The problem with that theory is the church going to come to a point where it generally accepts, say, the ESV, or more people can accept the ESV. So we say, well, the church accepted the KJV. Well, now we say the church has accepted the ESV, so we're going to use the same measuring stick.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the question I'd asked.
I know that's where it's headed. I've thought that question multiple times. Yeah. So what is the answer? I don't know. That's why I don't think we should have all these nasty conversations. I think there ought to be more of what we're doing here. There ought to be more, okay, let's try to get to the bottom of this as much as we can. And I don't know. The problem is everyone that tries it, you end up with these threads that end in no man's land.
Right. And we are standing alone in no man's land, actually able to have this conversation, and I appreciate that. And if your answer, Dan, to this problem of, well, what do we do, when Greek New Testament manuscripts differ is, okay, pragmatically, prudentially, everybody already trusts this one. Let's just stick with it. And if we do update it, let's update only the English so that we can preserve as much of that trust as possible. Like, I'm all down with that. Let's do that.
Let me make this statement. I want to make this statement for you, and I want to make it as clearly and concisely as I can because I'm getting this quoted as you are as well.
Yeah.
I want to make this clearly and concisely. I am okay, not just okay. I think that there will come a time where the King James needs to be updated. I believe that if it were updated and we followed their choices, just updated the words, updated the punctuation even, to a more current thing, I think it would have the effect of unifying the body of Christ in the same way that the 1611 translation did back so many years ago. I think that it is time for us to be honest about this and discuss an update, but I don't want to do what the NKJV did. I don't want to go down the road where we could use this critical text to bring in, this reading could be different, or I want to stay with. I
don't think they use any critical text readings. I really don't.
I know,
but even to use a different TR,
even a different TR. Okay,
right.
To your point, if that's where it is, don't use a different TR. Use the one we have. Don't even worry about the TR, except that when you're trying to understand the meaning of the word. And don't update words like giants to Nephilim. Come on. Don't change presidents to satraps. Come on. If we're going to make it understandable and keep it the same. And I think if we did that, we would end up with a translation that was trusted. And in a very, very short time, more people would be using it.
And I'm with you, actually on everything that you just said. Even though I'm totally fine with the New King James and I wish it would be accepted, I acknowledge there are people out there who trust the King James so much, and for many good reasons they trust it, that it would be wise, prudentially and pragmatically, to do exactly what you've described. Here's my next comment, and that is, I'm not going to put the hours and hours and years into this, probably, unremunerated, and not because I'm in it for the money, just because my kids need to eat, right? We're talking about major amounts of work. I'm not going to put that work in until the King James folks come together and get behind it. I want to see King James only institutions for whom the text is supposed to be the issue, like Ambassador Baptist College, like Pensacola Christian College, like West Coast Baptist College, some of which have publishers like Abeka and like Striving Together Publications. If they come together and say, yes, we can do this, we can do a merely English only update, I will happily help. I will also happily step aside if the leadership says, you know what, your connection to this is going to tank this. People won't trust it because Mark Ward was, involved in it. Fine. I don't have to be involved. I'd be happy to help however I can, but it's got to be coming from the King James side. That's my perspective on the practicality of this.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I think you could be of help, but the question would be to you would you bring NKJV type influence? So that's what happened to the NKJV. There were guys that were like, It doesn't matter. It's a different translate. It still says the same. And they had the idea that we don't need to stay pure with it. Well, and so that's why there's the differences in the NKJV, which is the same thing you had in the 1881 revision. You had guys that were like, Burgon fought with these Westcott and Hort because he was like a purist, you know what I'm saying? And then you had Westcott and Hort who were bringing in critical text renderings, and that's where we ended up with this big fight.
No, that would not happen.
And that's the thing with you. I would want clearly to bring you into a conversation or part of this, and I think I accept and recognize your scholarship. And I don't have any doubt about your salvation myself. I have no doubt.
Thank you.
I just think we have difference of opinions, and I would definitely enjoy your expertise in something like this, as long as you knew, okay, I got to put aside all of that other stuff that I would bring into the table.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Because I think in the late 1970s, when the New King James was being worked on, into the early 80s, the King James only movement was not as widespread, and it wasn't as developed. And my personal feeling, I actually just had dinner with Dan Wallace, who helped with the New King James. I had dinner with him a couple of weeks ago in London. I'm not usually that much of a jet setter, but this one time I was in London with Dan Wallace at a restaurant and had a lot of time to talk to him about the King James only debate. And he told me some fascinating things, like he didn't sleep the night before his debate with Sam Gipp and those other guys that they did at the John Ankerberg show. That's why he was
that brings back
low energy. Yeah. But my impression, I would like to confirm this with Dan if I get a chance. We'll see if I do. I didn't think to ask him this, was that although he sincerely tried to make sure that the New King James followed Scrivener, and he told me that he worked on that himself, he might have missed exu in Luke 1:35. He might have missed the tenes versus tenes in Hebrews 3:16 because they're so minor. He's not perfect. The New Testament is a big book. I don't think that anybody was purposefully using critical text readings. But now with the further refinement given to us by the pressure of the King James only movement, who is insisting we've got to use Scrivener, I'm saying, fine. And now I will be rigorous on making sure that it's an English-only update, even though I personally don't believe that's necessary. I think the New King James should be accepted by the text is the issue world. I put more emphasis and value on them reading the Bible in their own English than I do on them using the New King James or on making advances, what I regard to be advances in textual criticism.
And I've done so many options for that.
Yeah.
There's so many options.
Right. There are those options.
I mean, if you want to go that road and you don't worry about all of those other things, NKJV and MEV, you can go down those roads. But for guys like myself, that would say, you get what I'm saying.
I totally get what you're saying.
I'm okay with an update. I want an update, but I want it to be lockstep with the authorized version that we have.
And although a bunch of my King James only brothers will dispute me on this, I think a lot of them silently, tacitly acknowledge I have done the work on English to be able to distinguish the difference between a textual update and an English only update. I will give this kind of caveat. If I do this, then study to show thyself approved becomes be diligent to show yourself approved. And some King James onlyists are going to say, you changed it. I didn't. Study in 1611 actually meant be diligent. I've proved this over and over again.
And there again, I would disagree with you because I think changing that verse is a mistake because to me, study is a bigger word, and that's another. We don't need to go down that road, but I disagree with you on that choice of and that's where a committee. That's where some of the guys throw up their hands and say, "Well, we can't do this. Let's just leave it alone." But I think we can. I think we can if we, stick with. Because I don't think I think there's a lot of words like study, coasts. Those are words that
you wonder if they're really
misunderstandable. I mean, I get finer minutia thing. You're in. We could really, but I don't think they're as far as you would think.
Yeah. Here's what's going to happen in such a committee, Dan. You're going to be on. Let's imagine you're on it and I'm on it, and people from West Coast Baptist College are on it, people from Ambassador Baptist College, people from Pensacola, people from the King James Bible Research Council, people from whatever's left of the Dean Bergeron Society. I don't know. Whoever we can get together in the text is the issue, King James onlyism. And we're going to disagree at certain points. And let's say study is one of them. And the only way forward, in American culture is you take a vote. Mm-hmm. And let's say that the Be Diligent folks win by 1 vote. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then on another one, I lose. And it goes back and forth a number of times. That means we're going to be putting out something that nobody on the committee is perfectly happy with. Yeah. But we recognize that the reason you nonetheless have a committee and don't just do your own, where you can be perfectly happy with everything, is that a committee represents institutions that steward the trust of a lot of people. Correct. And if a lot of people come across, be diligent to show yourself approved, and they're like, well, I don't like that, then they can stop and think, well, but I have to recognize that the people who put this together represented institutions I trust, and maybe they had a reason that I don't understand. The other thing I've thought is anytime we made an update, we would annotate it. Literally every single update, we would make a brief explanation. And you could copy and paste a lot of those because they would be the same over and over again. But I would think that would be another step that would be useful for people. That's the only way I see forward for the majority of IFB King James onlyism to accept
and
an
I
update
think,
to the King James.
I think Dr. Waite's King James Defined is a good start for that. That was well accepted. The KJV Defined was well accepted by the King James. When I first started using it, I have for years used it as a pew Bible.
Neat. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
The KJV Defined.
Good for you, guys. Yeah.
For probably 20-some years, as long as
it
came out. Huh?
Do you have it right now in your office?
Yeah, I probably do, yeah.
Can you look up 2 Timothy 2:15?
Yeah. Okay, so he's got the word study highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, he has Greek be diligent.
Okay.
That's what he uses.
Interesting. Okay, that's good.
So you're like, he is...
Me and D.A. Waite, we're tight in his one place.
There you go. Who would have thought? Really now. So honestly, your point is well made. That obviously any update like this is going to be a collaborative effort, and you're right. Not anyone is going to be completely 100% okay with it, because none of us are on the board of heaven. Right. It is preserved, Yeah. It's preserved in heaven. We don't have access to that copy, as it were. And so, we have to do the best that God has given to us. And I think that something along those lines would be amazing at some point. And maybe we're in the 1500s to the 1611. Maybe we're 50 years away from this being done. But I think it's something that needs to begin. The conversation needs to be had. Yeah. And I'm hoping that this series of talks, our debate, the series of conversations we've had on this podcast and others, you've had on others and I've had on others,
right?
That the conversation, will be kind of sane. Yeah. And if God will use us, that's fine. I would love to be used in this way.
Right. Me too.
If it's up to Him, it's up to Him.
Right.
And I'm not, again, I'm not God, so I can't say, Mark Ward, you can or you can't. I can even say Dan Hafley can or can't.
Right.
It's just, but
if the Lord wills, we will do this or that.
But I think it's in my heart that this conversation needs to be had.
Because of those kids who are shouting out in the lobby near your door, we need to give them God's word in English that they can fully understand as much as possible.
Right. And I think that what's happened in our culture is there's a lot of guys that have missed the fact that our culture is completely speaking a different language than we are. And they are completely away from the authorized version conversations.
Yeah.
The halls of justice that have the KJV on the walls is completely foreign to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's like David Cloud said, that there's people that speak English.
Right. Indonesia or Singapore or Kenya.
That don't understand
Right.
exactly what's going on here.
Yep.
And can't read it. And so what can we do?
Right.
So anyway, well, hey, I think we better get going. They're waiting.
I agree.
So
can I say one more thing, Dan? Because I have eagle-eared people listening to my promise to back out of the King James debate. If you and I get to do something formal, like have a conference in 2025 or 2026, or have even a private kind of boardroom type meeting where we would talk about a King James update, I would not regard that as violating my decision to back out of the debate. To me, that counts as part of the academic work that I could do on the topic. I just don't want to be arguing about King James onlyism anymore. But if we're going to talk about a King James update, that is something I'm still willing to put time into.
So let's just say this, Mark. Let's say that your statement about backing out of the King James debate is something that people that have understood you to say because they have false friends. They don't understand what you mean by that. I understand that I am tired of having debates with people that don't want to talk about the real issue.
Yeah.
And so I'm with you in that regard, that I would if a guy's going to go down and say that the King James Bible is secondarily inspired, that I can't change a word from prevent to precede, I don't even want to have a conversation with him unless he will listen to me and I will listen to him.
Yeah.
If we have a cordial conversation, but when he starts calling me a Bible hater,
and I believe he is unsaved, right?
And unsaved, and I'm not separated enough.
Right.
I don't want to have those conversations either.
Right.
So I'm with you on that. In that I'm not interested in having a conversation that has no point.
Right.
But this issue is something I've said. I think we're at the beginning of the good conversations about it.
Yeah.
I don't think we should end the good conversations about it.
Yeah. I think that even this discussion with you, I don't want to do it on the channel in the future, and that has nothing to do with you, because obviously you're conversing and we're not having that kind of argument that you're describing, the fruitless kind. But I would want it to go private, to continue in private the way we've been doing before and after the debate.
Sure.
And then to go formal, that is, to potentially turn into some kind of institution that would put together institutions. I don't know how much hope I have that could actually work, but you're the person across the aisle that I trust, one of them, to help try.
Yeah, and I've spoke with some of my friends about this too, and there's some interest in that kind of thing. So
great.
We'll see where it goes, and just ask God to direct us. And
let's do that. Amen. God bless you, brother.
You too. Thanks.
Talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Bye.